Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. I am joined here today by Conrad Emmerich, the Senior Vice President at Atrium Health, and by Luxion, the Executive Director at Assure. Assure is a center of excellence for the Federal Aviation Administration's unmanned aircraft systems. Gentlemen, again, thank you for being here. We've got a lot of great content, so let's just jump right into it. Conrad, maybe you could start by telling us a little bit about who Atrium Health is. And I know it's not all of Atrium Health that is doing drone deliveries, perhaps a part of Atrium Health involved in drone deliveries.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Thanks for having me. Lux, it's good to share the virtual stage with you. So welcome as well. And I guess I'll send a welcome to everyone tuning in and learning more about what we're doing within Atrium Health and our hospitals from a drone standpoint. So to answer the first question, Steve, Atrium Health is a health system that's spread through 3 states right now: North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. We're comprised of 42 hospitals, and just recently went through a combination of bringing Wake Forest Baptist Health as part of the Atrium Health Network. And that's primarily where our drone work has started and is currently in operations today. So within Winston-Salem, Wake Forest Baptist Health, we are operating drones in the delivery of pharmaceuticals as well as lab supplies. And so hopefully in the future, we'll continue to expand that and be able to expand that within Atrium Health and other locations other than in Winston-Salem right now.
Beautiful. And Lex, the same question for you. Can you tell me a little bit about Assure?
Yes, sir. Thanks, Steve. And Conrad, pleasure to be on here with you and the demonstration of all the great things UAVs, drones can actually do. And then welcome our audience for listening and thank you. Assure was established to serve as the center of excellence for the FAA. And what that really means is it's 26 research universities worldwide now. We've expanded into international that provide the academic research that will enable UAS, unmanned aircraft systems, to integrate into national airspaces, international airspaces worldwide. Our focus obviously is with the FAA, which was our start, but we also conduct research for NASA, industry, all around.
Beautiful. And Conrad, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that Wakefield, it's Wake Forest Baptist, was the first in the United States to do drone deliveries as a regular part of doing business as opposed to just a pilot. That's correct, right?
I think we're one of the first. I do think that there are some others out there that are doing it, but I don't believe, Steve, it's more than a single handful. But we are one of the first that are doing regular drone deliveries for daily operations.
And can you talk a little bit about the scale? Is it sort of 3 or 4 deliveries a day, or what sort of scale are we talking about?
Yeah, that's a good question. And our aspirations, which we'll get to eventually, are much different than getting our feet underneath us and getting some drones flying with some product. So we started in late June of 2020 during the pandemic, and we did not want that to deter us from kicking off this important project and setting the stage for future improvement to logistics. And we were only doing a couple a day, and we were primarily moving pharmaceuticals from one of our main facilities about a third of a mile over one of our I won't call it a major highway, but a significant size parkway within Winston-Salem. And we were trying to improve the efficiencies for day-to-day operations with the pharmaceutical deployment and with the deliveries. So we were doing about 2 or 3 a day, and that slowly ramped up as we began to more thoroughly integrate ourselves with the scheduling done at the clinic, with kind of what the daily outlook looks like, and then also expanding what type of drugs and pharmaceuticals we can put into the unmanned aircraft so that we can continue to expand our footprint. So that took place for about 3 months, 4 months. We had some learnings in that. And then in December, we started doing laboratory specimen collections coming back. So we'd send pharmaceuticals there, and on the way back, we were doing specimens and collections. And we're probably flying about 8 to 10 times a day now. So we're getting closer to maximizing some of the capacity within that single drone and single route.
Can you help us visualize how it works? I mean, is this like a helicopter, look like a helicopter pad on top of a building, and how do you do the safety? And, just walk me through the nuts and bolts.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we have a lot of work goes into planning this, obviously highly regulated. And there's a lot of very informed and smart people and a lot of experts behind the scenes that allow us to do this. I'm clearly just the face of the operations and the initiative right now. So we established, I'll call it kind of a safe area, both from our main facility within the parking deck, along with one area at our receiving, I'll call it the receiving facility. So both are within the corners of parking decks on the top level, and it's sitting in the corner, and there's probably about 20 to 30 feet of a box essentially that has a landing, a 4 foot by 4 foot, we'll call it a landing pad that gets put out, and that is where our drone takes off and lands at. The process of getting the product to the drone loaded so that then the drones can fly is really the manual process of walking the specimens, walking the pharmaceutical out from the lab to that area, handing it off to a pilot, and that pilot then loads the drone, communicates with any other air activities that may be going on. Clearly, we have to consider any type of our medical helicopters that are coming in, any type of transport like that, to have a good understanding of where what lies in the skies, I'll say. And once that has been cleared, the communication continuously goes back and forth with the receiving end, and once locked and loaded, the drone will take off. Usually elevates to about 350 to 400 feet in the air, and then transports over to our other facility, and then just descends into the landing pad. And I've watched dozens of these, and they are spot on. Where they are landing, where they are taking off. Very rarely do we always hit the target, and so it's a pretty smooth operation. The drone then lands. Everyone's still kind of into the safe zone. The small propellers will eventually come to a stop, and the pilot will then confirm that that is safe to enter that area. He or she will then go take the payload out of the drone, and then walk that in and hand that off to someone within the clinic, who then takes that and does what activity clinically we need to do with that.
So a couple follow-up questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as I listen to this, the drone pilot has complete line of sight for the whole flight, and he's using a joystick-like thing to control the drone. Would that be right?
I'll answer that in two ways. One, there's continuous line of sight right now. So there's that handoff that can take place visually, I'll say it's visually, from the pilot that is sending the drone to the one that is receiving it. So there is always a line of sight through the sky on that drone. As for a joystick or controls, there are controls behind the scenes that are being managed so that the flight goes seamlessly. That does occur, and that's really that relationship and that constant communication between the ground or both ground pilots. That is a continuous conversation and communications between those two.
Right. Okay. And you mentioned you want to make sure there's no low-flying aircraft or anything like that in the area. So are you in contact with an FAA control tower to clear these flights?
That I may actually ask Lux if he has his expert opinion on that. Our team works with our medical dispatchers, our air dispatchers from our med air teams, and they're in constant communication with whether or not something is coming into land, because we are probably about 100 yards away from where the helicopters land for Wake Forest Baptist. So that communication is constant. I believe, and here's my lack of knowledge in this space, there's multiple constant communication and touch points going on with multiple people on what the traffic in the skies look like at that time.
Lex, can you clear this up a little bit?
Yeah. So what this is like one operation that has been established to achieve some level of safety. So the specifics of who they are talking to, like helicopter pilot, and does that helicopter pad actually have a little bit of control? I doubt it. It's all primarily done visual flight rules, and usually, and you can think of this nationwide, air traffic control is not involved in these small UAS delivery or small UAS operations. And it makes sense when you consider the workload of what these things are going to be like as they grow and develop. So the FAA is developing different mechanisms, primarily called UAS traffic management, UTM, to be able to provide more autonomously or through a system that's low altitude, that level of deconfliction and control of operations. So right now, unless they're in an airport, close to an airport, or in different kinds of flight paths to an airport, really close to an airport, they're not talking to any tower or any air traffic controllers.
Okay, great. And Conrad, when I think about this, it's hard for me to believe that drone deliveries are economical, that they're as inexpensive as, for example, a courier making these deliveries.
Mm-hmm. Great question, Steve. And it's probably one of the main questions that I get pretty regularly from folks when we are talking about drone deliveries and incorporating them into our logistics and delivery infrastructure. And I'll say, we are establishing the building blocks for the future. And I think when we look at our network of logistics and our network of infrastructure and where we need to go, clearly the point A to point B single route, delivering a specimen, a drug, delivering a small level of PPE, clearly there is a more economical way to do that than drones right now. What we are planning for is the future, where we've got this spider web and this infrastructure where drones are going to be a much more economical way to deliver goods, and much faster to deliver goods. And I think, we don't know yet what that critical mass is from the number of routes, from the number of times a drone has to deliver each day. That's all, that's part of that business case that we're going to start developing. But our goal was to really lay the foundation, start collecting some data, be able to do A to B, B to A, and put ourselves in a position to be able to expand when we get the ability to. From a regulation standpoint, we can, when we can fly beyond the visual line of sight. But that's when, quarters on the dollar right now to transport something will turn into pennies and fractions of pennies. So I firmly believe that the future of logistics and the future of moving things has drones as a component of it. And I do believe that the costs associated with delivering will be much, much less, and will be it'll be significantly more in line with other means, and probably more efficient in the future.
Yeah. So when I visualize this right now, I visualize sort of flights that are not within line of sight, right? So, um, you're in North Carolina where there's mountains. I can see a truck maybe having to go 25 miles to deliver something 3 miles away over a mountain. And I could potentially see those kind of flights that are quicker. And when it comes to healthcare, right, there's a different way to think about service. A consumer goods company, if they're 98% on time, with the goods they're supposed to deliver, that's okay. But when you're talking about people's health, I think it's okay to think service is going to cost a little bit more. So to me, it sounds like the economics of this depend upon being able to move this out of line of sight. And Lux, maybe you could help us here. Where do we stand with those regulations?
So what's holding Conrad back, and then the whole utility of UAS, is regulatory risk, right? Safety risk and the FAA and providing space. But what's critical in this, and I'm going to answer Conrad's business case here in a second, but it's this iterative process. We have to get operations like Conrad's going so we can analyze the data of how well they fly, what are the issues, how well it's going. So we have fact, we have actual data that we can show to the FAA that this is safe. And we use that. Really what he needs and what really all operations need are a few things. One is that beyond visual line of sight, detect and avoid. So let me hit all of them, then I'll come back. Detect and avoid. Operations over people. So when these things fly, they're going to be flying over top of people, potentially into cities and things like that. The ability to do this autonomously. The FAA has never, until the 737 MAX incident, has always put it on the pilot in command or the operating agency like Delta or United or whatever to be responsible for the autonomy. But there's stuff that we can do in autonomy, get that certified. And then finally, a biggie is, especially you can imagine in comrades or any kind of logistics, multi-aircraft control, where you use autonomous systems where you just tell it, I need you to go to this house. That network is in place. The routing is there and the UAV flies the safe route. And now the man that's operating them, or woman, is Overwatch. It's just managing multiple aircraft moving around the system. But to get there, it's a very iterative, proving out process because we can't afford, especially in this area, until all the great things that Conrad's doing starts getting demonstrated to the public. If we lose a UAS, it falls in a playground and just cuts up a kid and there's blood and it's ugly, we're going to set this thing back years, and nobody wants that to happen. Nobody wants anyone hurt. So it's moving along. So where are we? Detect and avoid. It's critical, right, on how to do that. And for manned aircraft, we have the eyes. The pilot's always looking around and is responsible for separation. So that's in process. We are currently doing the performance standard and testing them from the industry standards that are coming out to prove out the detect and avoid standard that has to be met. What has really been difficult is to that standard, how do you test systems coming at each other or with a manned aircraft and do that safely in case the detect and avoid doesn't work? We don't want to create a collision. So the testing protocols for the method of compliance are being developed right now and tested. Operations over people, that rule has come out and we are developing the means of compliance for that. What's the process to get your aircraft and your concept of operations, your mission to pass that. And we're in the very beginning because the FAA just hasn't been, and they've been very leery of it, is autonomy and multi-aircraft control. But we've just kicked off 2 projects in that area, trying to define what are the key factors for multi-aircraft control levels of autonomy, what kind of traffic and all of that's necessary. And then best practices in autonomy and engineering, we're going through that. All of that is laid on top of all these different type of certifications and frameworks we're developing so that Conrad knows what he is going after and what he's being graded against. And what we're asking from him and all these others is provide us your data, keep updating us on what you're trying to do and where you're trying to go, many times protecting that with non-disclosure agreements, so we can start building out the networking, because we're modeling what the network, FAA network is going to look like going forward, so that the airspace is available to him, so that he can go operate in the future. So all of this kind of wraps and folds in on each other to make it happen. And that's what Assure's goal is to reduce that regulatory risk and enable them to get out there and do their thing.
So detect and avoid is that like every drone is sending a signal out and the other drones are able to pick up that signal, or is that kind of a control tower effect thing, or how does that work?
So it can be multiple. It can be on board, it can be off board, or it can be hybrid. So on board is a system on that aircraft that as it flies around, it has LiDAR or acoustics, and it can hear and know that something's coming to it. Think a bat, flying around with its little things going on. You can have radar on the ground that's informing either the control station or the aircraft that there's other things in the area to avoid, or a combination there, of both in the system. And again, what we have to get away from thinking about a person saying, United Flight 243, turn right heading 060 and climb and maintain 2,000 feet. This is going to be much more autonomous, especially when this UAS traffic management system's in place, to be able to maneuver and deconflict this traffic also autonomously. That UTM standards are being developed both in the United States and internationally. And we're expecting to get rolled into that here real shortly on what those standards will be for those systems and what they have to do to be compliant going forward. But it's not a lot of voice. It's really deconflicted with autonomy.
Right. And Lux, we don't ask somebody that flies an airplane, a big airplane, to prove that they're not going to fall out of the sky and land on a person, right?
Right.
We just assume that, right? So why is that so difficult with drones? What's the big deal there?
A couple of things. One is when you don't have anybody on board, you got to worry about something else, right? When the biggest factor was all the people in the tube, then that was one issue. But over time, aviation has built a history, and we know how reliable it needs to be. So one of the things Assure is doing right now is developing the performance standards for reliability certification to demonstrate that Conrad, flying the aircraft that he's flying, can generate so many flight hours between any kind of incident or accident. And that's another means over time to go that safe. So what we have said for airplanes not worrying about them hitting people on the ground, first of all, we know if a 737 lands on somebody's head, they're not going to be in good shape. But we didn't know that for UAS. So these smaller ones can hit somebody in the head and it's a little bit off center. They may be totally okay. They may get a crack, a cut or something, or no, it can cause death in certain situations. And what are those situations? So we have gone to figure that out. So there's some more nuance with smaller UAS that could be built for a specific mission that's over top of people where they're at more risk because of, they're flying over people more often, that we would never fly a helicopter or an airplane over. So it just opens up the expanse of opportunities. I don't see it as restrictive. I see it as much more nuanced in what these things can do in the future for us.
So when I think about this drone for carrying freight for deliveries really taking off, it's a regulatory process. And so, for example, I've watched Department of Transportation regulations in several areas, and it just takes forever. A simple rule that you'd think everyone would agree with. It takes a year or two to promulgate, and then they open it up for comments, and it takes a year there, and then there's a court case, and that takes a year. I mean,
So,
to really to get to this economically do this, I mean, geez, it could be 10 years, right? Or am I totally off on this?
no, so the process is slow, and there's interagency that you didn't mention in there in the middle of all this, right? The FBI, Secret Service, everybody's concerned about these things flying around. Department of Health will be concerned because there's levels of safety. reliability that's going to have to be demonstrated in the system. So yes, the timelines are long, but because of the way this is being developed, because of operations like Conrad, we can go out and create little test places to go do. And we learn, and then we do waivers. We can have, it doesn't have to be full law before we put in and say, we got enough data here that we're going to be able to waive these type of operations going forward. And before regulations are even in place, we're building a system right now to capture all the things about Conrad's operation, his aircraft or whatever. Now somebody else wants to go do it. As long as you're using aircraft and this kind of stuff, that's good. You might have to go because you're flying over a little different city. You might have to prove out some other data, but as a way to kind of speed up the process. And then the last thing that's happening is on the sideline of all of this is industry standards are being developed. And those industry performance standards really speed the process, and the FAA relies on them to stay up because things are changing so quickly to get things in place, and then uses Assure to do the verification of those standards so that they know they can go waive it and get it out there in the airspace. So although it's going to take a while, it is happening, and it exponentially, as we get more and more operations, you get more and more data, it'll speed up exponentially.
So let me summarize this and see if I'm on the same page with you. It sounds like for someone like Conrad and Atrium Health, they could start to apply for waivers for bigger and bigger areas, and it could be part of a bigger operation in the not too long future, right? Maybe 2 or 3 years.
Correct. So as we, for example, even potentially Conrad, and I don't know if this would ever work, but as we're doing the project for multi-aircraft control, as we're doing the project for ops over people and deliveries like this, we could co-opt Conrad and his operation as part of the FAA work and study to prove it out. And then in the meanwhile, Conrad's getting to do all these operations of which we're collecting the data. So we're always looking for industry partners and government partners to go out and actually get some of this stuff going and then be able to collect the data. There's the problem for Conrad though, is there's always, then you have to deal with the FAA, more frequently. They're interfering because they want the information, and it's an impediment. But those groundbreaking companies and governments that are doing this are really helping this process get kickstarted. And like I said, once it gets going, the questions that we are being asked now out of the FAA are not the little technical things for the most part. It is operational, that we want to do medicine delivery to rural areas. It's starting to move into those big things. We have a big disaster prep and recovery project, and millions and millions and millions of dollars going to how can UAS mitigate damage and loss of life during an emergency. And we're working that. And the FAA is concerned about it, which is nice, instead of just worrying about what happens when it hits somebody in the noggin.
Right. So as an analyst, what I want to do is I want to sort of be able to tell potential customers and people that use us, if you have a waiver, and we have to get to a point of autonomy to make this more economical, can you just give me a guesstimate? Waiver plus autonomy, are we 3 years out? Are we 4 years out? Are we 1 year out? And I'm not going to hold it to you, but
No.
Just as a rough guesstimate.
So I would say small operations for a waiver, doing things on the edges of cities out to suburbs and definitely more towards rural. Those are probably 1 year to 2 years out because we need the data, right? We'll have special little operations to go probably maybe even as soon as 6 months.
And those would be autonomous, right?
Yes, it's because we're working that right now. We're starting that with the FAA. Maybe about 1 year with our follow-on work, because right now we're kind of defining all the parameters of autonomy, hardware, software, oversight, of the autonomy. How do you make sure it's all staying generally safe? But following that work, we're going to actually have to go out and start doing, with different systems to start testing out autonomy to define those performance standards and then a means of compliance. So that's about a year off. Now, that doesn't mean Conrad can't go out tomorrow and attempt to prove to the FAA through a waiver that they're going to be safe enough to go try out some autonomy to do this, and maybe have even two pilots. I mean, one pilot flying two different aircraft. It'll be more difficult. The FAA is moving into it. They know they have this research lined up that's happening on the sideline. So depending on how comfortable it is what they're getting from us, it could start moving. So in small bits, I think we're at the 1 to 2 year for autonomy and multi-aircraft control, because that's what we're looking at. That's the research we're conducting, and we can't conduct it without data. So we need operations to start happening.
Right.
And Steve, that's what we're holding our hat on right there, is that, 1 year to 2 years out, we can start doing a little bit more expanded service. I want to kind of go back to what, the issue that Lux brought up before is safety versus speed. We're talking about two industries that are probably some of the most highly regulated industries in out there. I'll just say that, between aviation and healthcare. And I'm not concerned about safety, because we are putting in all the checks and balances to ensure that we get product A to product B, vice versa, backwards, in a safe manner. I think we're going to do that really, really well. The concern from my standpoint is the speed. So the more that we can get these really point A to point B, I'll call them simple flights, and the more data we can collect to build that case so that we can go further, we can go beyond visual line of sight, we can start increasing our payloads to be a little heavier than what they are right now. The speed is what we are counting on to be able to open up our logistics network and our infrastructure to bring value to healthcare, period.
Right, and because he's doing that, because he's doing something that's so important to our people, right, and to the nation, I have room to argue to Congress to get more money for research. I have room to argue with the FAA to support that concept of operation through certain types of research to enable that. And then in a technical interchange meeting, quietly, when they start acting up and I want to be a little funny, I can just say, hey, stop being baby killers and let's move this thing along, because people are dying. And this mission is great. Healthcare, disaster recovery prep has really opened the gates for us. And we are well outside the FAA, are getting hits from all kinds of different healthcare, first responders all around the world to go do more. And I expect Assure to have to grow exponentially also. It will not even, in another 2 years, I will have very little understanding of all the different pieces and parts of it, because it's just so complex of what we need to do to grow this. But particularly in the area of public safety and health is our go-to area, because everybody understands the need and understands the benefit of improving this capability.
Well, you bring up something I think is worth pushing on a little bit, right? So, I think, I don't know how many years ago Jeff Bezos was on 60 Minutes and he was talking about drone deliveries, and the feasibility of delivering a pizza and dropping it in somebody's front yard, I just don't see that as a business use case that's ever going to happen very quickly. But healthcare, where margins are bigger, well, at least for the medicines, maybe not for the hospitals, and where service matters because lives are at stake, that's a business case that makes sense to me. So comments from either of you on that, right?
Great, Conrad, I'll let you.
Yeah, thank you, Lux. And I think you hit that straight on, Steve. The value of being able to bring, and I said this before, the value of being able to bring access to those that can't get to us is critical. You use the example of being in a mountainous territory, trying to get pharmaceuticals or prescriptions or lab samples or testing kits, we'll say, to patients that sit up in a mountain somewhere on a snowy day, and they can't come down to the pharmacy. They can't come down to have a test done. but we want to open up access and bring that to them. I think that is the value from a healthcare standpoint. You know, I'll go back to say healthcare margins are very small, Steve, but
Yeah.
the value and the non-fiscal margins value that resides within healthcare. We are talking about people's lives, their well-being, and having access to drone delivery in the future and bringing that connection business to consumer, consumer to business is super critical for overall health within our industry. And I think this technology, this means of logistics and transportation can help us do that from healthcare. I think we can save lives. I think we can take costs out of healthcare by just primarily moving things like prescriptions, like samples, like tests back and forth out of patients who don't have to leave their home or who may not be able to leave their home. And I think that's a lot of value that we can bring with this technology.
And Steve, if I could jump in real quick. So when we're looking at it, we're seeing the need and the push to lift regulatory restrictions. I've kind of started looking at it as Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You know, the pizza or the beer out while you're out fishing, we're at the self-actualization fund side. Down here in healthcare, that's security, safety. What's popped up, the firefighting and first responders, that's all one level there. But even what has happened during the pandemic that they've reached out to us to help out is food scarcity. Farmers are having difficulty getting the food to the places that are going to distribute the food, the stores. All of that is another advantage because it's the rural, everything's so spread out. It's a great application, and that one doesn't have to be tiny. We can use larger aircraft to do some of those kind of things. So I think if we focus on the lower end of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and provide services through UAS, through autonomy in that area, I think we're going to get the biggest bang for the buck, and the people, the public will be so supportive of it. It'll help to keep it growing. Because right now, all UAVs are doing is spying on you and shooting and killing kids around the globe. So we got to change that perception.
Yeah. Now, I think the other thing we need to potentially clear up a little bit for folks is the value chain here, right? So, Conrad, it's like a manufacturer, right? A manufacturer hires a transportation carrier. Very few manufacturers actually own their own trucks. They hire somebody to carry it for them. So your value chain is, you have something that needs to be delivered. You hire an air carrier, and the air carrier in turn is depending upon the technology, the drone technology, to get better and better. Would that, gentlemen, both of you, is that sort of an accurate way to look at this?
Yeah, I think it's a partnership. We are going to stay within our core competency. And when things get outside of our core competency, or the price to enter is too high, we are going to engage a partner to help us. And that's exactly what we're doing from drones. We see the future. We believe there's an opportunity to do it better than what we're doing it today. But we don't have the expertise. We don't have the infrastructure. We, quite frankly, need to apply our funding for things within our core competency within healthcare rather than from a logistics and a delivery standpoint. So we're going to partner with someone who brings all that to the table. And we both win because we're solving an issue that we bring forward. They're coming in and partnering with us. We're able to collect the data. We're able to get our feet under us and do some of this, but we're both going to be able to win in this. And the more we expand that, it's a win for both, for vendor A that helps us with this service as well as us.
How many, if you're looking for a truck, there's tens of thousands of trucking companies, right? How many drone carriers are there?
Yeah, I'll let Lux answer that. I don't know. I know that there are a couple out there, but it would be a guess if I were to state a number.
Yeah, it's a very fragmented space right now, and the levels of I mean, some people just put up a shingle and say, I got my drone and here I go. I'm going to do it. I passed my pilot test. I'm ready to even go commercially, which is a low barrier to entry. But I'm not having that person fly around a petroleum place and stacks and things like that. They're not there. So there's a few throughout the United States, quite a few, probably close to one per state, or maybe a few more in those bigger states that are really large scale, really qualified UAS operators. And that is going to be the challenge too. It's something I already talked with industry, especially at these ARC meetings, is do they develop internally or do they partner? And it really comes down to, I think, what Conrad said is stay in your area of expertise. But if you're going to have an operator flying down stacks at a refinement factory, well, he doesn't know what to look at. He doesn't know the dangers. So there better be somebody there to provide that core competency to that pilot as he learns that skill, or vice versa, 50-50. That pilot is teaching this person who's expert in stack inspection to how to use this new tool to go do it himself, and then use the proper tool for whatever nuance that he finds. So it's kind of a trade-off, and it's going to have to vary by industry on how to do that.
So I want to open it up. I think we've had a very good discussion. During this discussion, were there any thoughts popping in your head that really didn't fit what we were talking about at the time, but is a good way to sort of wrap up this discussion? So I guess I'm asking for final thoughts here.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And Lux, again, thank you for presenting with me, and as well as the audience that's listening. And really final thoughts around this from a healthcare perspective. We are really excited about what drone deliveries can help us achieve. We're excited about, as I mentioned before, bringing access to those that can't get to us, and not just from a traditional supply chain of business to business within our network, but being able to go business to consumer. That's the next step for us. I think it's really endless, the opportunities that are available to us. So we're excited. We're going to stay the course on our vision and our strategy in this space. And I think, I hope, 1 year from now or 2 years from now, we'll have a much more complex infrastructure and a much more complex story that we can come back and share with you.
Lux?
Yeah, Steve, thanks for the invite to be here. And Conrad, thank you for the application, making this stuff happen. And to the folks listening in, I guess I would close with, we're at a stage where you can either participate or not. If you really want these things to be something that helps you in your public safety, makes your quality of life better, you're a business that really has a great application for this thing, that's who we need as researchers. You're the expert on what it is you're trying to do. We just need to help enable it and lift the veil of regulatory restriction and risk so that you can operate. And we're always looking for partners to help us understand those challenges that you're facing, so that we can get those removed from you. And working either with the FAA, and also we work internationally now. So things like operations in urban cities, we have a school in governance in Singapore, which is a city state, which gives us an opportunity to do that research there, so that when the FAA is ready here in the United States, we already have the data to prove it out. So we need you, we love you, and hopefully Conrad will get you operating large scale soon.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for participating. For the folks listening in, I just want to make a statement. In about 15 minutes, we're going to have the last supply chain panel session here, and it's terrific. It is best practices around risk management in sourcing. APQC did some great research, an unbelievably good big survey that they went back and looked at, made sure that all the responses were valid. So really good stuff, really applicable to the pandemic world. Anyway, I'm going to finish up by saying, Lux and Conrad, again, thank you so much for participating in this.